So before we move on to the main items of business, I would like to ask the officers to introduce themselves, please. If we start with Beth and then go around the table, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Beth Howland-Smith, Development Manager.
Amy McNulty, Democratic Services Officer.
I'm Alex Ingalls, Senior Planning Officer.
I'm Andrew Smith, Head of Strategic Housing and Communities.
Lewis Jones, Planning Solicitor.
Mike Birch, Senior Network Resilience Officer, Flood Risk.
Marie Clark, Area Team Leader.
Tracy Farthing, Planning Officer.
And Stuart Corby, Principal Planning Officer.
Thank you. So now you know who to blame, don't you, if everything goes wrong. First item on the agenda is the minutes. The minutes of our last meeting have been on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you happy that I sign them as a true record? Thank you very much. Amy, have we got any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Richard Cole, Councillor Joan Hegan and Councillor Trevor Sadler.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Baker has made a representation on item A1 in a personal capacity, and in view of this, she will withdraw from the meeting while the application is considered. I believe she wants to add something to that declaration.
Councillor Baker.
Chairman, may I just say that I'd like to compliment Officer Alex Ingalls on being very sharp-eyed. There were a lot of representations on the Orchard Farm application, and he did very well to find out that I'd made a representation before I was elected. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Chairman, Beth Howland-Smith, Development Manager, has also declared an interest in agenda items 7.5 and 7.6, and will leave the chamber while those are considered.
Thank you. Amy, any questions by members of the public or from members?
Thank you, Chairman. None received for either of those.
Thank you. Beth, any relevant updates to government guidance, etc.?
Thank you, Chairman. No, nothing.
Jolly good. So we move on to the applications for planning permission. And just to note that should site inspections be required, these will be held on Tuesday, the 10th of December, at a time to be agreed at the meeting. So the first item for our consideration this evening is item A1, 7.2 on the agenda, which is application reference WA/2019/0296, Orchard Farm, Wormley Lane, Hambledon, and the proposal is for the erection of 9 dwellings, including 7 affordable. And I would invite Alex to present the application.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. So before we start, just a short brief verbal update to the report that 2 additional neighbour representations were received after the publishing of the agenda. These expressed objection in concurrence with the letters that had already been received, and it's considered that these have been suitably addressed within the body of the officer's report. Also, an additional condition is recommended in accordance with policy CC2 of the local plan. Part 1, that's sustainable construction and design, to ensure that prior to the first occupation of the dwellings, the highest available speed broadband infrastructure shall be installed and made available. This slide shows the location plan. So the application site measures 0.69 hectares and is bounded by Petworth Road to the southwest and Wormley Lane to the north. This aerial photograph shows the site within its context. So Orchard Farmhouse and the existing outbuildings can be seen, as well as a Grade 2 listed building, Wood End, to the north, and Tigbourne Court, Grade 1 listed building, to the southeast. The slide shows the block plan. And this is the proposed site plan. So a total of 9 units are proposed, 7 of which are affordable units, with 2 market dwellings, plots 1 and 2, at the northern end of the site. The site is accessed, or proposed to be accessed, from the north via Wormley Lane and south from the Petworth Road. The local area of play is proposed for the southeastern corner here. These site photographs, they show the northern part of the site, including the existing farmhouse at the top left, which does not actually form part of this application boundary site, and a view from the access along Waverley Lane in the top right, and the northern section of the site at the bottom. These photos show multiple existing buildings within the site. And these photos show the boundary fronting the Petworth Road. The bottom one there is to show where the access, the existing access is to be upgraded. And these photos show the wider site area to the south and the west. So plot 1 would be a 2-bed bungalow. This dwelling also benefits from a detached garage and has 2 bedrooms, and is one of the market units. Plot 2 is a 3-bed chalet bungalow. Now this dwelling also benefits from a detached garage and is one of the 2 market units as well. Plots 3 and 4 are semi-detached units, 2-storey dwellings. Plot 3 is a 2-bed unit, and plot 4, 3-bed unit. Plots 5 and 6 are semi-detached 2-storey dwellings. These are both 1-bed units. Plot 7 and 8, also 2-storey semi-detached units. Plot 7 is a 2-bed dwelling, with plot 8 a 3-bed unit. And finally, plot 9, which is a detached bungalow, and this is a 2-bedroom unit. So these section plans are taken from the centre of the site. The top section is a view away from the Petworth Road. So the existing farmhouse can be seen at the top of the site. Yeah. And the bottom is a view towards the Petworth Road. So you can see that the single-storey dwellings are generally proposed to the top, to the northern area of the site where the land level is higher. So the key matters for consideration for members this evening are the impact on the greenbelt, the affordable housing need, the impact on the heritage assets, the design and impact on visual amenity, the area of outstanding natural beauty and the area of great landscape value, the impact on residential amenity, the impact on highway safety, on trees, flood risk and drainage, and biodiversity. So as set up within the officer's report, the planning balance assessment concludes that the benefits of bringing forward this proposal outweigh any resultant harm, and the application is therefore recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. Now, this application, as with the next 2, is subject to public speaking, and I would first like to invite Mr. Richard Young to speak on behalf of the objectors. Mr. Young, I understand the procedure has been explained to you, and you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
I'm speaking tonight as part of a large group of Hambledon and Whitley residents objecting to the application. The level of concern is high, with 86 objections having been registered, an extraordinary number for such a small community. The application fails to meet the local plan criteria for rural exceptions. For example, the need for 7 affordable homes in the parish has not been established, as demand is based on a survey 5 years out of date. Furthermore, as in 2017, objectors consider the survey has been misused to overstate true demand, estimated to be 3 to 5. Since 2017, many nearby housing developments have been completed or are planned and are well able to absorb any residual Hambledon housing need. We believe input to economics used to justify market homes is incomplete, and the applicant has therefore not demonstrated they are minimum. Consequently, the application should not be approved as a rural exception. The proposed development would also be inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. Limited affordable housing is permitted, but not market housing, as neither national nor local planning policies mandate inclusion of market homes under relevant Greenbelt exception. Moreover, existing buildings in the application area are tightly clustered in less than a quarter of it. Over half the new homes would thus be built not on the footprint of existing buildings, but on undeveloped greenbelt. As this would impair its openness, it would be inappropriate development and should not be approved. The Surrey Hills A&B advisor notes this extension beyond the existing buildings and a failure to conserve and enhance the natural beauty of the landscape, contrary to his organisation's policies. In his opinion, harm to the visual amenities and character of the landscape could be mitigated by a public open space. Absent such provision, however, mitigation cannot be claimed. There is a widespread view among objectors that the scale and design of the proposed development is too large and will have an adverse suburbanising impact on its rural setting. Flood risk also continues to generate serious concern, as the capacity and timely implementation of off-site elements of the drainage scheme remain unclear. Furthermore, many, including the Lutyens Trust and Heritage England, remain concerned about harm to the setting of nearby heritage assets, notably that of the exceptional Grade 1 listed Tigbourne Court. Finally, there is considerable unease about the applicant's piecemeal approach to its orchard farm assets. These were purchased as a single entity, and objectors believe Economic should treat it similarly by inclusion of proceeds from the open land and the farmhouse to determine the permitted number of market houses. Only by doing so could the applicant demonstrate the number is truly minimum, as the local plan requires. There is also concern the applicant contemplates extending the curtilage of the farmhouse eastwards to carve out a large garden from the green belt and AONB. Residents fear this might become the subject of an application for yet further development and consider it important planning policy is not circumvented in this way. Considering the many issues raised, we request councillors to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Now invite John Anderson, representing the Parish Council. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this opportunity to address you. Hambledon Parish Council has for many years supported and continues to support the provision of affordable and small houses within the parish. We know there's a continuing need and we fully support this current application. This new application has taken note of the planning inspector's comments relating to the previous one. The new application is smaller, with 2 shared ownership houses, 5 affordable and 2 market houses, all to be built primarily on the existing footprint of the current farm buildings. Our comments to Waverley in support of the present application have also taken into account comments and concerns from the Parish Council and villagers. We have raised these with Waverley and the applicant, English Rural Housing Association. These concerns included drainage, which now has a robust detailed proposal, and the use of the adjoining land, which in the previous application was proposed to be community open space, but will now be used for the private keeping of horses. And Surrey Hills has stated this to be perfectly acceptable and reflect its current use. ERHA has agreed to this. The officer's report covers all the planning issues and we support their recommendations, which they confirm meet NPPF policies and Waverley's planning objectives. The scale is smaller and on a reduced area of land. The roof lines have been reduced and fit the topography of the land. This development would not materially affect the openness of the green belt and the AONB. Surrey Hills, as I said, has accepted the adjoining land is to remain with its existing use as horse paddocks. As commented by Waverley planners, and any potential minor disruption to neighbouring properties is outweighed by the benefit of increased affordable housing. We're losing small houses in Hambledon. In Hambledon, houses with permitted development rights, certificates of lawfulness, and up to 40% extensions which have been recently granted. These increases in areas have been in the Green Belt, AONB, and in some cases conservation areas. The Parish Council has recently supported planning approval of 5 small houses in Hambledon, but these too have subsequently been extended. Therefore, they're no longer small nor affordable for many local people. There is a need, and at Orchard Farm, the houses would remain small and affordable in perpetuity. People may say there are other developments in the wider area, and suggest we put the people looking for affordable and smaller homes in those houses elsewhere. However, Orchard Farm would provide an opportunity for Hambledonians and their connections to continue to live in Hambledon. Hambledon is a thriving community. Orchard Farm is next door to a mainline station, 2 regular bus routes nearby, shop and cricket greens a 5-minute walk away, the local nursery school, the village hall, the pub and the church, together with the football club, are all close by. Orchard Farm would be an integral part of the village. Surrey County Council has not raised an objection on the basis of traffic, but reduction in speed limits on the A283 and through Hambledon and adjoining villages would help and be generally welcome. So to conclude, we fully support this application. The issues previously raised have been addressed and meet planning criteria. Mr. Chairman, thank you for listening to us.
And finally, Mr. Nick Hughes, the applicant. Good evening.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, English Rural is a specialist, locally based housing provider of affordable homes. Within Waverley, we have developed 15 schemes in 9 different villages. Primarily rural exception sites, these range in size from 4 to 15 affordable dwellings. Our schemes are well regarded and over the years have featured in the biennial Waverley Borough Council Design Awards. The principle of a rural exceptions policy applying in Hambledon was established in 1999 when permission was granted for our first scheme in the village. These homes have remained occupied by the original households. With no new affordable homes in the village since that date, opportunities for local households requiring affordable housing over the past 20 years, almost a generation, have been few and far between. The need for affordable housing in Waverley has always been recognised, and as house price trends continue to outstrip average wages, fewer people are able to purchase their own home, and those that can't do so are doing so later in life. There is overwhelming evidence documenting the situation is worsening. The Council's Housing Register and the Hambledon Housing Needs Surveys evidence a local need from within the parish. The National Planning Policy Framework states local planning authorities should support opportunities to bring forward rural exception sites that will provide affordable housing to meet local needs. Orchard Farm is a highly sustainable rural location with community shop, post office, bus stops and even a railway station all within easy walking distance. The site includes, as you've seen, a number of existing dilapidated and unsightly outbuildings, offices, stables and barns that do not add to the visual character and quality of the wider landscape. The application has been designed to respond to the site in context, in that the new development is positioned in the area of the existing dilapidated outbuildings. The new development has a smaller footprint than the existing buildings. The proposal is low density. Proposed building heights are minimised by setting the buildings into the slope. Single-storey and chalet bungalows respond to the topography of the land by being at the higher part of the site with the houses at the lower. The extensive tree belt is retained, providing good screening to Petworth Road. Existing points of access are utilised so as not to create new gaps in the site frontage. The development does not include land next to Wood End, and a good degree of separation exists between Tigbourne Court and the new dwellings. Off-site, we are committed to financing and undertaking, in consultation with the lead flood authority, improvements to local surface water drainage routes. We are also committed to return the adjacent paddock land for grazing purposes. The application has been subject to much consultation and discussion, and the officer's report provides a very clear assessment of the arguments, together with the favourable responses of the statutory consultees. As the timeline between our first scheme in Hambledon and the present proposal illustrates, opportunities for new affordable homes in our rural villages are scarce, and this is a rare and exciting opportunity. I would urge you to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Members.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to get my glasses on. Firstly, I want to thank all the members of the public who have come over this evening, an awful evening as it is, and who have given your time to do so. And for those of you who have shared your views with us, those for and against this application. As a councillor, we're taught that only the facts and information we are allowed to consider when making a decision about a planning application are those which are material to that application. This means that my decision tonight must be made on that basis alone. As would be expected, I've studied the detail of the Orchard Farm planning application very carefully and considered all the objections which are material to it thoroughly. I know that the planning officers have worked very hard, both with the applicant and with appropriate agencies, to overcome these the objections to achieve planning balance. I also think it's important to note that Hambledon Parish Council itself is in support of this application, and in particular, the affordable housing element of it, as the Chairman advised earlier. On this point, I, like many of my fellow councillors, are concerned that we do not have sufficient affordable housing within the borough, and that we know we have to increase this provision. I believe this small development will contribute to that goal. Accordingly, having considered very carefully all material facts and information presented, I will support this planning application and will vote in favour of the planning officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, I'm in support of the borough's general strategy to have more affordable housing. And generally, I can see myself supporting this. I do, however, want to ask a few questions, and so I'm extremely pleased that you've asked Andrew Smith to come along, because I think he's going to be the ideal person to answer these particular questions. So in terms of affordable housing, you'll appreciate in my head there's an incongruity between Hambledon and affordable. And so could we just explore what the word affordable means in this context, so that we have some guidance as to what affordable really is. I was also wondering if you could just give us some of your experience in dealing with this particular housing association, because to me, often when we talk about affordable housing, first off, it's assuring us that when we say affordable, we mean genuinely affordable and who for. And secondly, that the housing association that's going to be dealing with this particular tranche of affordable housing is somebody that we can trust and rely on. And I would just very much appreciate your comments on those two issues. Thank you.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, affordable is one of those words that means what you want it to mean. In terms of affordable housing, here we have 2 shared ownership properties which will be offered for sale. I would think somewhere between 30 to 40% of market value. So for those in housing need who earn too much money to go on the housing register and certainly can't afford to buy a property in the village that they love, that's an ideal way for them to be able to acquire a home. They can acquire extra shares, but only up to 80% of the value, and the Housing Association will retain the golden share, so that all resales will be managed to local people. The rented properties, the rents that will be charged there will be within the local housing allowance, which means that even if somebody falls on hard times or is already on housing benefit, that benefit will cover the rent. So it's an affordable rent, made affordable for those who cannot afford to rent or buy on the open market. It's important to note that English Rural Housing Association, as Nick Hughes said, has a history of working in this borough. I have to hold my hand up and be transparent in that I worked for the association and its predecessor for 8 years, and the scheme at Canada Copse in Milford on the Wood Pigeon Wormley site, and Duncombe's cottages in Hambledon are my fault. So I do have an experience of this association, They only do this kind of scheme throughout the whole of the UK. They only build homes in small villages for local people. And I do think it's important, not only when we think about affordability, that these are affordable to local people, it's a parish local connection. So first and foremost, these properties will only be made available to people from Hambledon Parish with that strong local connection. I expect the 106 will contain a ring of reserve parishes, which will include Whitley. And so therefore these homes will be affordable for local people in perpetuity. The final thing I'd want to say in answer to Councillor Follow's question is that these homes cannot be sold on the open market. There's no right to buy on these homes. They will be affordable in perpetuity and a resource for Hambledon Parish as far as the eye can see, just as the Duncombe's Cottages scheme has been, which was built in 1999-2000.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, did you wish to continue?
No, I'll just say then that in practice, that's actually kind of what I've always meant by affordable. That's the definition I think we should be supporting. Some of the affordables that we've seen before have either been demonstrably not, or are things that we will lose control of over time and go outside of the affordable and social housing pool. In practice, I couldn't in good conscience object to an application that is doing the exact type of affordable housing that we should be doing everywhere. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am able to support this application. I fully understand local residents who don't want any additional housing. None of us want additional housing, particularly in our backyards. But sadly, we need the housing. And I think that the need for these affordable homes has been demonstrated. I think this development looks to me to be an extremely good development, well suited to the geography of the land there. I don't buy the objections in terms of any objections from the Lutyens Trust or others. I think the spacing is going to be entirely adequate. Is this sufficient for a greenbelt exemption? The officer's view is that it is. I've carefully considered that, and I agree with them. A comment has been made that this development is tightly clustered. I don't feel that it's tightly clustered. I think it's quite spacious, and I think the way in which the single-storey dwellings have been put towards the top end of the site, all that makes perfect sense to me. I don't buy the threat of a flood risk. The relevant consultations are there for us all to see, and Thames Water, Southern Water, and so forth, and the local flood authority all are happy. I was particularly interested to hear the rights to buy and all of the. I was going to suggest something about permitted development and removing it, but I guess that's not really required, or is it required in terms of preventing any permitted development? I don't know quite what the position is with the housing trust as to whether they can. I certainly wouldn't want to see extensions to the houses here to, in the words of I think Mr. Anderson, taking away the very nature of the houses. That's something I would like to see certainly in perpetuity. But I think this is a pretty good scheme, and I will be supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yes, I'm very drawn to the nature of the application, and clearly it's the type of application that we would very much welcome across Waverley in the light of the guarantee of affordability and perpetuity and so on. My concern, and I would want to be allayed of this concern, and would be interested to hear whether there are substantive reasons for allaying this concern, is that the site does fall within the green belt, and we are looking here for very special circumstances. Now, in terms of my understanding of it, yes, there are 7 affordable homes within this development. There are also 2 homes which are saleable on the open market. I understand the rationale which is given and which would normally be entirely acceptable that the proposal for 2 open market dwellings is to ensure that the provision of the 7 affordable units is viable. However, in the light of this being on greenbelt land, then does this not therefore contravene such exceptional circumstances? So that is one key question that I would want to have answered before I can possibly consider supporting this application. And secondly, the impact of the assessment of the proposal's impact on the openness of the green belt, I think is fairly crucial to this application. Officers have considered that the proposed development does have an impact on the openness of the green belt, and I would be interested to know why that is not considered to be materially harmful.
Beth, would you like to address those questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your question. If I could just draw your attention to the heading on page 22 under 12.3, which is the impact on the green belt, you'll see that there are certain development types that can be seen as exceptions to green belt policies, and this is one such exception. So it is the officer's contention that this does amount to an appropriate form of development within the green belt, and as such, the very special circumstances requirement falls away. In terms of the impact on openness, I mean, again, this is, as you say, considered within the report under 12.4 on page 23. Yes, I mean, it is development, and built development will, by its very nature, have an impact on openness. We, as officers, do think that it is well contained, and any harm arising is minimal, but it is, of course, open to members to reach an alternative view in terms of whether or not it is a harmful impact. It is an area for judgment for members. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Beth. Councillor Cossa.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think, like Councillor Williams, I always very carefully at these applications in the green belt, and I think it's desperately important that we assure ourselves that if we are going to permit development of any kind, I think in the green belt there are very good reasons for doing so, and in this case clearly there is a balance to be struck here. I think where I possibly depart from Councillor Williams is in some of the judgments and conclusions I've reached in doing that. It does seem to me very clear indeed that there is significant benefit from this proposal. I've looked at both to what Andrew Smith has said and also the figures in the report about the actual needs in the area for this sort of housing, and I very much share the view expressed by the parish council that this is a rare opportunity to provide something that is very much needed in that particularly rural context. So my view is quite simply that the significant benefit we gain from this does far outweigh the less than significant damage, and that's the way I view it, to be caused to the environment, which I do note as well is it can also be mitigated to some extent by some landscaping. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I actually looked, when I first saw this, at the Housing Association, and I must say I was quite pleasantly surprised to see that they have come top in a lot of their endeavours, and I think they proved themselves quite trustworthy, and I think there is no problem with actually going along with them, particularly with the need for social housing, which I don't think anybody can argue with, which fits in with the Waverley Council strategic plan. We need more social housing. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you. Members, would anybody else like to comment, or shall we?
Sorry, Councillor Martin's question about permitted development rights I don't think was answered. I think I'd quite like to just know the answer to that as well.
Okay, Andrew, does that come under your remit?
It could do, Chairman. Certainly, there, like with a number of housing associations, particularly with English Rural Housing Association, there would be any kind of extensions would not be allowed, because the whole reason for this is to keep those homes affordable in perpetuity. And what could happen is if there was a household in that property renting from the association for a number of years, one of the household members got disabled and needed a wet room conversion, that kind of thing would happen under any good social landlord, but not extensions.
Apologies, may I just ask, is that the landlord that makes that application or the tenant? If it came back to, say, Central Area Planning Committee for such an extension?
That would be the landlord.
Councillor Martin, you wish to come back?
Just on the same point, what about the market homes, the 2 market homes and permitted development as far as they're concerned?
I have been advised by the officers that it'd be perfectly acceptable to include an additional condition, just to remove Part A, permitted A to B, permitted development, and that would cover everybody's concerns. So, if you're happy then, members, we'll move to the vote. And sorry, Councillor Lee, sorry, I didn't see you put your hand.
Sorry, I've been told already tonight I'm quite small, so I didn't get seen. I support the application fully in terms of the need for affordable housing. I just have 1 or 2 little queries to tidy up my thinking. First of all, is the local flood authority has no objection subject to conditions. I'd like to know what the problem might be and what the conditions are. That's my first one. And similarly, for environmental health, I can't see any impact of this development on environmental health. But again, it states here there are conditions to be placed on that. And finally, the archaeology. And if we can just confirm that there is a requirement for an archaeological survey before the beginning of any development. And I wondered how that might happen if there's already buildings on the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, do you want to go through those? Flooding, environmental health and archaeology.
Sure, thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you, Councillor. I'll just run through a couple of those first. So the environmental health ones that you mentioned, so that's as the site has a former equestrian and farming use, so there was potentially contaminated land that the site falls as, so that's the nature of those conditions. And the archaeology, similarly, so the county archaeologist has recommended that condition, which I'll find the numbers for you while when we just have a look. In regards to the flooding and the drainage, do have Mike here from the Leeds Local Flood Authority who might be best placed to answer those particular questions. Mike, do you want to pass you over?
Okay, Mike, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, so regarding the conditions that we have attached to our response, there are standard conditions because the information we receive at planning stage is normally preliminary information, just to see if it's feasible that what they propose can be built. And in this case, which is a large swale along the kind of south-eastern side of the site. So our standard conditions, there are 2 conditions we've asked for, would actually ensure that the detailed design stays following the principles of the drainage statement that was submitted. Our second one, which is a post-construction, which just is a verification report to make sure that the drainage system has been built to the standards that we require and is operational. I think that covers everything.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, does that
Yeah, thank you
answer
very
your
much.
questions?
That's fine. Thank you.
Right, Amy, over to you with the electronic buzzers.
Sorry, Chair, is the additional condition inserted at your discretion, or do we need to motion for it and do all the regular business?
Why don't I just say that the recommendation is that subject to the completion of the Section 106 agreement to secure the provision of the affordable housing and SUDs and off-site drainage within 3 months of the date of the committee resolution and subject to committees 1 to 25. Now, Alex mentioned an additional condition. And we also have the additional condition for permitted development. The additional condition that Alex mentioned was broadband, which was described in the earlier report. We've also decided to remove permitted development categories A and B, which cover A and F, okay? A to F, inclusive. And so that's subject to conditions 1 to 25, the 2 additional conditions and informatives 1 to 13, permission be granted.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just check whether any councillors wanted to call for a recorded vote? Or are you happy to go with the pie chart?
I take it the green donut means it was unanimous.
I didn't actually press anything, it just came on and flashed and came on.
Oh. Sorry, you're correct. Shall we run that again? Apologies.
Yep. Okay, that recommendation is carried and permission will be granted. So would somebody like to tell Councillor Baker that she's welcome to rejoin us? Thanks, Andrew.
I would
Thank you.
suggest
Very well.
similar to Alex's about the superfast broadband.
Right, members, we move on to item A2, 7.3 on the agenda, which is application reference WA 2019-1096, land at the rear of 27, 29 and 31 New Road, Milford, and the proposal is for the erection of a single-storey dwelling with associated parking and bin store, and I would invite Stuart to present the application. Stuart.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Just to bring your attention to the update sheet for this item, formal written comments were attached to the application from the Highway Authority. They recommended no objection subject to conditions and informatives, which are stated on the update sheet. The application site is located in the settlement boundary of Milford, north of New Road, within a site which has been set aside to the rear of 27, 29 and 31 as a site for development. The aerial view shows the 3 properties to the forward of the site with access running alongside, and the particular site area showing it as a heavy canopy of trees. However, this has been cleared to reveal an open site with trees retained to the rear boundary, which have been appointed to have TPOs attached to tree number 5 and number 6. The site layout block plan is highlighted here, both existing block plan and the proposed block plan on your right. The dotted lines on this layout plan indicates the history of the site. We have had a black dotted plan showing the 2006 application, which was dismissed at appeal. We have a blue dotted highlighting the floor print of the site in 2012 as refused, and in green, the solid green line is the current proposal as outlined. The site layout floor plans are here highlighted. And the proposed elevations here are highlighted. Just to be clear that the height of the proposed property at single story is 4 metres to the ridge and 2.5 metres to the eaves. The width is 12.3 metres and the depth is 10.6 metres. As highlighted here, these are the most immediate properties adjacent to the site of 2-storey. This is the grain of the street scene of 2-storey. This is the immediate site, so the picture on the left is looking back onto the properties, addressing New Road, and on the right showing the site, which is now cleared of trees, with the trees at the back of the boundary retained. In context to the overall area of Milford, I just wanted to draw the members' attention to the layout of the area. We have the White Lion Gardens pub site directly to the north. Now, this was approved under a planning application 2017-2268 for redevelopment of this site, including 4 semi-detached 2-storey properties to the rear, which I will show you in a further slide. And the grain of this immediate area, this slide indicates to you that the blue is the buildings fronting onto the roads, the orange is frontage development, and the red is just indicating backland development which is established in that particular area. Just bringing you back to the White Lion pub site, this is just showing the frontage of the pub, which was converted into residential along the roadside, and the semi-detached properties at 2-storey to the rear. Just for the members to consider this application, the key matters are the design and impact on the amenity of visual amenity, impact on the residential amenity, impact on highway safety, impact on trees, drainage and biodiversity. Considerations are laid out in the body of the report and the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, this is subject to public speaking, and I would invite Mr. McMurray, the agent, to address us, please. Good evening. You have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Chairman, councillors, thank you for allowing me the opportunity of addressing you this evening and to speak in favour of this proposal. My name is Warren McMurray of C7 Architects, who prepared the scheme. The site has been vacant for many years. Our planning application is agenda item A2, and I thank the officers for their very clear appraisal of the application and their professional recommendation that permission be approved subject to 15 conditions. I would like to make the following brief comments. Milford is now no longer washed over by the Greenbelt. Milford pattern of development has changed in the last 7 years since the last refusal. There are now houses all around, White Line being one of them, and other backland development. The plot is surrounded by residential development and now forms acceptable infilling within the village of Milford. The size of the dwelling has been reduced significantly. The distances between this single-storey dwelling and the neighbouring 2 stories properties is such that there is no overlooking from the new house. As referred to by the case officer, the houses on Cherry Tree Road are 25 metres away. The houses 27 to 31 are 20 metres away. The site is well screened by mature trees and planting. The 2 important trees on the north boundary have now been protected by TPOs. The access and parking is acceptable, and Surrey County Council recommend with conditions. The application fully accords with the NPPF and the Council's development plan, as confirmed in the agenda in front of you tonight. There are no objections from the Milford Parish Council, Natural England, Thames Water, Surrey County Highways. I confirm the applicant has no objection to the recommended conditions, and thank you again for the opportunity of speaking to you tonight. As you have heard, the application is supported by your officers. I therefore respectfully ask that you approve our application in accordance with their recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'd like to say one thing about the drainage on this site, because there was a representation made by a member of the public who said that someone living in Cherry Tree Road, actually, who said that there had been problems with the drainage. So we did have a Thames Water official here for a presentation the other day, and I made use of the fact that he was in the building, and I have followed up on this complaint about the drainage. Apparently, it's not to do with the installation itself, it's to do with the management of the installation. So it was reasonable for Thames Water to say they had no objection to this scheme. I'd also like to say that I don't think that you can complain about any overlooking if this application is consented and the bungalow is built. However, I do have reservations about the principle of the thing, notwithstanding the fact that the green belt no longer washes over Milford. In fact, the green belt designation was removed to facilitate more houses on allocated sites with regard to local plan part 2, is my understanding. And of course that has not been settled yet. But as regards the pattern of development in New Road, I think that the characteristic of that part of New Road is that you have long gardens. I haven't seen anything on the screen that shows me that there has been building on those long gardens. So I take it that this is actually a precedent. I don't agree with the statement in the report that it doesn't impact on the character and appearance of the area, because I think it clearly does, simply because it changes the pattern of development. And I also noted that the inspector, in writing his report on the previous appeal, said about the intensified use of the vehicular access, that it would be detrimental to the prevailing character of the area. So I'm not sure that I am happy about this application for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, as the other Milford councillor, I made a site visit myself to this particular site, and one of the 2 things did concern me. One is looking at your condition 6, which is to do with the authority tree officer looking at the site. I wondered if anyone could tell me whether there are any established TPOs on this site, because there are more than one. This seems to refer to one tree. And to me, they look like a sensible barrier between, let's say, the garden, as whatever that will be, with Churchy Road as well. And if those trees were to be taken out, it's going to open up the vista.
Stuart, would you like to address that question?
Yes, so condition 6 was assigned to the application because it was felt that two particular trees along that boundary were of special significance. So with that in mind, the TPOs were attached. Obviously, over the course of the development, the amenity space may encroach upon the canopies for those trees, and under a separate permission or a separate application to crown or take away parts of those trees would be something that would be considered by the tree officer. So that, yeah, there's two particular trees which are TPO'd along that boundary.
Yes, Councillor Lee, please come back.
Just the last paragraph of condition 6 does say to safeguard the root of a mature tree. Perhaps the wording should be 2 mature trees.
Yeah, yes, there's a mistake there. So it's 2 mature trees.
Okay. I did have one other question, which is if somebody could clarify who owns the strip of land in front of this proposed site, where the residents of the 3 houses on New Road are currently parking their cars, and whether those spaces are going to be in conflict with the new owners.
The application, the actual proposal, obviously for 2 parking spaces there is obviously existing use of those spaces to serve those properties, and there wasn't any objection that came forward from Highways to say that there would be any conflict with that use.
So will there be designated spaces?
Serving the development, those 2 spaces would be designated for that,
right,
for the development going forward.
That would seem to me to displace some of the current parking onto New Road itself, which we already know is a bit congested.
There is also space along the access, if I show you in the photo here, for parking of cars along here. So they are associated with these properties, and obviously plenty of opportunity within that area to aid the immediate car parking provision.
The red line round the site doesn't include the parking at the rear of those houses. Have you got can you bring the block plan up with the red line, please?
Okay, on the left-hand location plan on the left-hand side.
Yeah. That the parking is to the southwest of that red line, isn't it? That serves the houses fronting onto New Road.
Separate to the site. Yeah.
What about the access to those? So that the access seems to belong to this site. Is there some right of way for those, or
there is a right of way between from the other properties as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Florence.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on Councillor Lee's points, could you, with the cursor, just give us a rough idea where those TPO trees are? And could I make a request for further applications that where there are TPOs that might be material to it, that they be flagged up on the site plan in some way so that we can see that clearly?
Yes, those trees are located here and here.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, just looking at the conditions, condition 10 on page 65. No part of the development shall first be occupied unless and until the proposed vehicle access to Horsham Road
They've got a long drive.
How is this supposed to read?
Sorry, apologies. Onto New Road, yeah, that would be altered.
Sorry, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I'm in general not happy with backland development, but I think it would be very difficult to turn this down and face an inspector, given the level of backland development that is around and the changes that have occurred in Milford over the last few years. So I am convinced on that. I think the access is okay. And I note that condition 2 removes permitted development in terms of they won't be able to make it bigger and put a second story on and destroy the whole point about my likely, I think, probably to say yes to this. But I think it's a bit marginal, but I'm happy to go along with the officer's recommendation, and I will support that recommendation to approve.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak before we go to the vote? Right, so the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 15 set out in the agenda report, with the note that condition 10 should be changed from Horsham Road to New Road. Well spotted, Councillor Wilson. And additional conditions 16 to 17 on the update sheet, and a broadband infrastructure condition, as well as informatives 1 to 8 in the agenda report and 9 to 12 on the update sheet, permission be granted. All those in favour, please.
That's 8 in favour and 3 against, Chairman.
Right, so that permission is granted. The next item on the agenda, Councillor Martin is leaving us. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is on the printed agenda is item B1, but it is in fact subject to public speaking, so it's on the revised agenda. It will be item A3, and its application reference WA 2019-1038 Forge Cottage, Bowlhead Green, and the proposal is for the erection of a carport following demolition of existing carport. And I'd invite Stuart to present this application.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a verbal update before starting on the presentation. Condition 1 should add a variation to a plan 1905 to 02A. This includes just some very slight design detail on the eaves to the proposed carport. Thank you. The application site is located in the village hamlet of Bowlhead Green, which is also a conservation area. As you can see for the location plan, the site as laid out in the red is a abutting green open space which forms the hamlet of other properties surrounding. The aerial photograph shows in more detail, obviously, the green space with the built form. This is the previous development at the site is noted to be a previous carport. Now, this carport was built of materials including grass and a metal frame. As you can see, the height of the previous structure was 2.5 metres by a width of 4.2 metres and a depth of 4 metres. This is indicated on the original plans and elevations on this particular plan. What now is proposed is for a carport to replace that previous carport. These photos indicate and illustrate to you that work has been halted subject to an enforcement investigation, which then resulted in the planning application coming forward. The proposed or continuous development proposal is for a carport which is 1 metre taller than the original at 3.6 metres, to a 1 metre increase in width at 5.2 metres, and retaining a depth of 4 metres. The carport is to be and is being built at the time by timber, with a timber frame, with feather edge boarding on the front elevation and a cedar shingle roof clad construction. I'd just like to invite the members to consider the matters here of impact on the green belt, design and impact on the visual amenity of the area of outstanding natural beauty and the AGLV, impact on the Bullhead Green Conservation Area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, we have public speaking, and firstly I would invite John Swift to speak on behalf of the objectors. Good evening. Would you like some water? Thank you.
Chairman, members, I'm speaking on behalf of the objectors to the proposed planning application. I live in the centre of Bullhead Green, near Forge Cottage. The application is for a carport in a sensitive part of the Bullhead Green Conservation Area, adjacent to the green in the centre of the hamlet. The houses surrounding the green, including Forge Cottage, are period properties which provide a delightful character to the conservation area, and this unique setting should be maintained. As detailed on Waverley's planning website regarding conservation area planning applications, conservation areas are areas of special architectural or historic interest, the character or appearance of which it is desirable to preserve or enhance. Planning control is directed at maintaining the special interests of the entire area, including the buildings, street scene, uses, and the relationship of these elements with open spaces and the landscape. The Council has a duty to pay special attention when determining development proposals to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character of the conservation area. In addition to this, Waverley's supplementary planning document regarding garages and carports states, building in the front garden should be avoided as it could appear unduly prominent at the expense of the character and setting of the house and the street scene. The principal issue to be determined is whether the proposed and partially built carport has a significant negative visual impact on the setting as viewed from the front of the property and the green. The application claims to be a replacement of a previous carport and uses this as justification for it. There are a few issues with this approach. The previous carport never had planning permission and was a temporary structure. The replacement carport is much larger in form and height than the previous one. As the applicant started building the carport without planning permission, we're in a position to see the impact directly rather than looking at plans. Hopefully you will have seen the before and current pictures of the carports. While the original carport without planning permission was modern in construction, it was low level and did not really detract from the view of the cottage behind or in the openness of the front garden and garage. This new carport demonstrates the relevance of Waverley's design guidance. It really does detract from the street scene and special character of the conservation area. The so-called traditional materials used, treated pine and cedar shingles, are not similar to that used on the building structure next to it. The cottage and outbuildings are brick and clay tiles. The structure is also not subordinate to the building to which it's attached. That building has a double aspect pitched roof, being the result of building the garage alongside the village seat smithy structure. The carport has a single pitched roof with a disconnect where it abuts the garage, as well as making the roof high with more visual impact. I urge you to consider the visual impact in this conservation area and to consider whether the very special circumstances the Waverley planners claim really exist. Please refuse this application.
Thank you. And I'll call on James Mendelson to speak on behalf of the parish.
So they're stepping them off. Yeah?
Good evening.
Thursley Parish Council objected to this proposal in June on the grounds of the visual impact of the proposed carport in a conservation area. The impact was immediately obvious because construction had started without a planning application having been submitted, and we were therefore able to see what we were commenting on rather than having to rely on the plans. Amended plans were submitted in September, and these were supported by a planning statement prepared by Paradigm Planning, which sought to show that very special circumstances existed which would allow an otherwise inappropriate development to go ahead in an area designated as a conservation area. These amended plans were never sent to Thursley Parish Council. We believe that the report provided by Paradigm is deeply flawed and are concerned at the reliance that may have been placed on it. Paradigm's report acknowledges in paragraph 5.02 that in a conservation area, construction of a new building is inappropriate, subject to certain exceptions, including if the extension does not result in disproportionate additions or the replacement is in the same use and not materially larger. It goes on to say in paragraph 5.06 that the former carport was a lawful building as confirmed by the builder's email. Whilst the previous carport, which had a much smaller footprint and was also 1 metre lower, had been built without permission and had clearly been there for more than 4 years, it was removed before this application was submitted. No certificate of lawfulness had been applied for or received, and the assertion that an email from a builder makes an otherwise unlawful building lawful is frankly bewildering. Perhaps I could question a number of other claims in the report, which I would ask councillors to consider in the context of the 2 photographs that I sent out yesterday. In paragraph 5.08, it argues that the carport is set well back from the road behind the boundary wall. In paragraph 5.1, it claims that the carport is not markedly larger than that which it replaced. In paragraph 5.14, it claims that the carport is well screened from the road, even though a tree providing screening has been taken down without permission. In paragraph 5.18, it claims that the carport has limited immediate presence. All of these claims are made in an attempt to demonstrate the required very special circumstances, but we would argue that these claims are wrong and fundamentally misleading. Moving on to the planning officer's summary, he states quite correctly that in considering applications within a conservation area, local planning authorities must pay special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character and appearance of the scene. He then writes, the carport is considered to be fairly modest and would not appear as a dominant addition. Again, looking at the pictures, we as a parish council are bewildered as to how the carport could be described as enhancing or preserving the scene, or indeed be considered as fairly modest and not a dominant addition. One neighbour described it as a carbuncle. No doubt you will form your own opinion. We understand that subjective judgments have to be made, but we would argue strongly that in this case, the size, position, and impact on the village scene of this proposed carport in a conservation area is totally inappropriate. It would create a dangerous precedent, and when looked at dispassionately and objectively, the evidence provided does not come anywhere close to amounting to very special circumstances. We would therefore ask you to turn down this application.
Thank you. And now I'd like to call on Jane Wunderlich to speak. Good evening.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members. My name is Jane Wunderlich, and I prepared the planning statement in support of the application, and I work for Paradigm Planning. My statement did explain the very special circumstances pertaining to this site. And I'm grateful for the officers for setting out very clearly in their report their considerations of the application. I have no objection to either of the two conditions that are specified there. I'd like to make an apology on behalf of the applicant in her misguided assumption that to replace the carport was permitted development. And she therefore raises her apologies for that. She didn't realise that to demolish the carport in the conservation area and to replace it required planning permission. I believe, contrary to the objectors, that this is a very small carport, and within the green belt, a replacement of a carport is appropriate development. Given that it was demolished, the original carport was demolished in error before she obtained planning permission, I think it's perfectly reasonable for the council now to consider whether there are very special circumstances with the previous carport being in existence in the past. Clearly, the previous carport was a permanent structure. At no stage has it ever been suggested that it was a temporary building. The proposed carport has been considered by your conservation officer, Russell Morris, and he advised on the minor amendment that he wanted to see for the eaves. Originally, the planner submitted, the eaves were much higher, and now the eaves have been lowered so that they follow through the eaves of the outbuildings. The photographs before you show the building as it is without that modification. So you'll see there that the eaves appear higher. In fact, when the building is modified, the eaves will be brought down, and that will significantly help in the appearance of the carport. That a change is shown on the revision drawing that the case officer referred to in the addendum. Forge Cottage and indeed its outbuildings, as already mentioned, if we can go back to the photographs, you will see is set back significantly from the road. And further down the road, there are other houses that have got garages and carports right on the edge of the road. There's a large verge in front of this house. In fact, it doesn't show how large that verge is, but you can certainly park several vehicles between the house, the carport, and the edge of the road. So it sits back well from the road. You can see in the officer's report that it fully accords with the planning policies and that the officers believe that very special circumstances have been proven. I disagree with the objections and the points raised in terms of the design. This is a typical timber-framed carport structure that we see being granted and erected in Waverley on a daily basis. And I urge you to accept your officer's recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. And members, as the ward councillor, I'm going to overrule you, and I'm going to speak first, if I may. Members, it's easy to wonder what all the fuss is about. I suppose it's just a carport, but it is a carport in the green belt. It's a carport in an area of outstanding natural beauty, and it's in the conservation area of Bolehead Green. It's virtually in the middle, the very centre of the conservation area, right on the green after which the hamlet is named. And it's attached to the old smithy, and the old smithy is very much the heart of this hamlet, which has a seat, the notice board, and the post box. So it's a very prominent little building. Bolehead Green is within the parish of Thursley and is therefore covered by the Thursley Village Design Statement, which has been adopted by Waverley as a material planning consideration in 2009. It hasn't, unfortunately, been considered in the officer's report, but this design statement says that extensions and alterations should be complementary to the dwelling. Well, I don't find this to be so. It says that local architectural features should be included. Again, I can't see any features that have been included. It also points out that handmade clay tile pitched roofs dominate the hamlet, and that the choice of tile colour and roof pitch should reflect those of nearby buildings. This carport has a roof pitch which is approximately half the pitch of the adjacent smithy building, and it's proposed to use cedar shingles, which are the sort of wooden tiles, the sort of thing you might see on a summer house at the back of your garden. So in no way does it reflect the colour, material or roof pitch of adjacent dwellings. Page 76 of the officer's report states that it should be finished with materials that allow for a sympathetic addition without detracting from the significance of Bolehead Green. But I don't find that I can agree with that opinion. On page 75, we get onto the very special circumstances that would make inappropriate development appropriate or acceptable. These very special circumstances are on page 78, rather. The first one is the carport is replacing a previous substandard carport. Well, that doesn't sound like very special circumstance to me. The scale, mass and proportion would be visually larger than the previous carport. That sounds more like an argument against the proposal than very special circumstances. The design of the previous structure appeared unsympathetic to the locality. Well, I don't find that relevant, and I can't see, again, any special circumstances. And finally, they say the scale, mass and design of the proposal would visually enhance the character and immediate surroundings. Well, once again, I find it hard to agree with that opinion, and I remain unconvinced that any special circumstances exist that could make this proposal acceptable. I'd be interested to hear the views of my colleagues, but at the moment I'm struggling to agree with the officer's recommendation. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely and completely agree with everything you've said. I think the idea of replacing something that was bad, that shouldn't have been there in the first place, with something else that doesn't meet a variety of borough and parish standards is absolutely something that we should be looking against. I think the thing that hasn't been mentioned really by anybody yet is the point raised by the parish council in the report about a tree being removed without permission as well, which I do want to just ask a few further questions about, because I assume that's potentially the subject of the enforcement action that you're talking about. I'll just ask for a comment on that in a second. But generally, I know we aren't in our deliberations supposed to set precedent, but I do think this is one of those times where we should be setting the tone of the sorts of things we want to see with applications. And I'll take it as read that the applicant did not mean to do this without planning permission, because I have no evidence to the contrary. But that does not detract from the fact that what is there does not meet the local and borough standards, and they've taken a tree out in the process. And I do believe that the point about the fact that we can now see the images of it, I think in practice, if the plans had come up, that might have been difficult to adjudicate on, but it is materially bigger. It's very different materials. I think we can actually see that in front of us. So I don't believe that it overrides the greenbelt protections, and I cannot support this application.
Thank you. I have been advised that it wouldn't be appropriate to investigate any enforcement action that may or may not be being taken.
Am I able to ask then for comment on the tree that's been removed and where that is and the character of that tree and what protections it had prior to its removal?
Over to you, officer.
The tree that was previously there was obviously no evidence of its height, its position in regard to the current position. It wasn't an issue which was enforced in the enforcement investigation. That answers.
The statement in the report says that tree was removed without permission, so it assumes that tree required permission to be removed.
Being in a conservation area, it would have required a consent for removal, but there's no evidence of when that was actually done, so it was difficult to.
Done at the time of the erection. All right, please. No, thank you. No interruptions, please. Right, Councillor Cossa.
Thank you very much. Yourself in particular, also Councillor Follows, have covered a large part of the ground I would have wanted to cover, so I won't do that again. I would just simply say that my analysis of whether there are special circumstances here is exactly the same as yours. I don't think that case is made. I also think the design, from everything I've read, is quite inappropriate in this context. What I do just want to pursue is on page 78, because I'm quite confused by this actually, paragraph 12.9, the second paragraph there, Officers are unable to establish the date the previous structure was erected at the site. No enforcement case is active requiring its removal. Therefore, its replacement has been assessed as a material planning concession to the planning case. Now, the way I read this, and you must tell me if I've misread this, is that effectively a large part of this case is built on the officer's view, which we don't have to share, of course, and I actually don't, that the replacement is potentially better than what was there before. What I just find odd, and I need to understand the planning processes in the department here really, is, well, you can't find the date that the previous structure was erected, but do we not have any records which would enable us to establish whether at any time any planning permission was sought for the original construction? That would seem to me to be the key issue, and I'm sorry if that's a naive question, but it's a genuine question, because if you were able to do that and establish that there was no such permission, then it seems to me the basis of your evaluation as to whether this was better than something that was illegally constructed before would have been quite different. So I'd be grateful for some explanation.
I think the point is, Councillor Cossa, that well, there is an email from the builder who built it that says he completed it in 2011. It does feature on estate agents' particulars, which were included in Paradigm's report. And I think the officer's opinion is that had the applicant put in an application for a certificate of lawful use, they would have had no reason to refuse it. So, well, the fact is the thing's gone, hasn't it? So I don't really see it as a material thing, but anyway, would the officers like to comment on that, or are you happy for me to move on?
Happy with you to move on.
Thank you. Councillor Baker, and then Councillor Rivers, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I do just want to make one comment about the materials that have been used. My experience of cedar shingles is that they do weather down. So I suspect that this wouldn't look quite so inappropriate after the shingles had weathered. Having said that, I don't really think there's any justification for substituting something that was much smaller and didn't dominate, basically, whether it was consented or not. But this seems to be just too big. I don't think it's in keeping at all. It is a conservation area. So I'm not going to vote in favour. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Penny Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is difficult. It's a kind of subjective consideration. But if the applicant was asking for a carport like for like the one that was there before, we might struggle because we would say that that was not in keeping in a conservation area. This one, however, seems to me to be absolutely in keeping in a conservation area. So really we're talking about one carbuncle looks like a carbuncle, another carbuncle might not. It's all about the setting, perhaps. But as Christine said about the weathering, we are seeing this. We have the advantage of seeing it, and the newness of it is rather striking. That newness will fade, and it will look perhaps like a barn. And maybe there was a barn there originally, or there certainly would have been barns in that village. So I have no objection.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Williams.
I don't think it is in keeping with the centre of the village at all, and I certainly would not support it. I don't see that there is a necessity for such a high building to house a car.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
I'm inclined to agree that because the building of a carport is an inappropriate development, on a greenbelt land and a conservation area, and this is actually and the very special circumstances. Clearly, just I cannot see how they can be very special circumstances. But the particular question that I would raise is that if we were starting from scratch here, if we did not have the image of the carport, and if we had on those photographs the original tree which would need to be felled in a conservation area, would we actually be allowing permission for this to be granted, which incorporates the felling of a tree in a conservation area?
Thank you. Any other comments? Right, so we move to the recommendation, which is that subject to conditions 1 and 2 and informative 1, permission be granted. All those in favour?
And that's 2 in favour and 8 against, Chairman.
Thank you. So that recommendation is not carried. Permission has not been granted. So I would like to propose that as an alternative recommendation, this application be refused because the very special circumstances haven't been illustrated to make it acceptable development in the Greenbelt. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Costa, thank you. Can I put that to the vote then, please? Officers, are you happy with those? Well, no, you won't be happy because it's against your recommendation, but those reasons, would they be acceptable to you?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to confirm whether it was Greenbelt you're objecting to, or is it also the impact on the conservation area?
I think so. Would it be apposite also to incorporate the felling of a tree? We know the tree has now gone, but that is something which would be a material consideration if we were planning the application without the illegal felling.
I'm advised no. Yeah, okay. So, proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Floyd Douglas. Did you wish to speak? No? Okay. Seconded by Councillor Cossa for the reasons of inappropriate development in the Greenbelt and unsuitable development in the conservation area. I recommend that this application be refused. All those in favour, please.
Councillors Rivers, you've not voted. That's 8 in favour and 2 against.
Right, so that varied recommendation is carried. Thank you. Right, so we move on to the next item. So we're into the applications not subject to public speaking now. Item B1, it's in the agenda as item B2. It's reference, sorry, Beth, thank you for your help. Thank you. Yes, it's application reference WA 2019 1321 Whitegates Churchfields Whitley, and the proposal is erection of extensions and alterations as amended by plans received on the 3rd of October. And again, I'd invite Stuart to present this application.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a property called Whitegates, located in the Whitley Conservation Area, adjacent to in a row of properties along Church Fields. The block plan indicates to the rear we have a single-storey extension, and to the forward infilling on the front to create an internal study, a small extension to the front. The aerial photo just sets out the kind of character of the conservation area with the main sort of historic house on this side, church fields, and then the lane with the houses adjacent to one another. The existing elevations show to the rear of the house at present there is a single-storey conservatory. And again, on the floor plan layout, the conservatory is illustrated here. The also existing addition to the back of the original house would be this lean-to extension with the conservatory leading off that as existing. The proposal is obviously the single-storey element to the front, and then the rear addition to the taking away the conservatory and replacing it with a single-storey. Nearly full width of the existing house on the rear, and the depth has been reduced by a metre from the original application as part of the application process. Again, the proposed elevation, the proposed floor plan, indicates the depth of it is at 3.96 to 4 metres. These are photos of the existing house and the conservatory to the rear. This is a neighbouring property, Lavender Cottage on your left, showing the context of the application site. In relation to the floor layout and the block plan, this indicates Lavender Cottage and the neighbouring property, Streen Cottages, and the indicated 45-degree angles from the windows serving these two properties, showing the limited impact on light into these properties as proposed. I would like to invite the members to consider the design and impact on the visual amenity, the impact on the Whitley Conservation Area character, and the impact on the residential amenity. The officers have concluded a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Cossa.
I have no problem or objection to this proposal, Chairman, but just to prove that Councillor Wilson isn't the only person who reads his papers assiduously, in paragraph 1, could I just encourage the new planning concept of more conversation areas across the borough rather than conservation? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are you happy for me to move straight to the recommendation on this? Jolly good. So the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 and 2, and have I got the right one? Yes, and informative 1, permission be granted. All those in favour? That's unanimous, so that permission is granted. So we move on to item B2 in the agenda as item B3, WA 2019-1093, 14 The Manor, Milford. Alterations to existing integral garage to provide additional habitable accommodation, alterations to elevations and associated works with new bifold doors and raised decking to the rear. And Tracy's going to present this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is, as Chairman's just said, for the alterations to provide habitable accommodation to an integral garage and for an area of raised decking to the rear. The raised decking to the rear is 0.8 metres in height. The application site is a corner plot at the junction of the Manor and Oak Tree Road in Milford. The front elevation of the application property is as seen on the screen, and this shows the existing and proposed elevations. The only alterations to the front of the dwelling is the provision of a window in replacement of the garage door. There's some amendments to or alterations to the side elevation. These mainly feature reduction in fenestration. To the rear there's bifold doors and the raised decking. The ground floor plans depict the extent of the decking. The matters for consideration are the impact on the visual amenity and impact on parking.
Thank you. Members, anybody spotted any deliberate mistakes? No. Okay. Any comments? Yeah. Happy for me to move to the recommendation? Okay. So the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1, 2 and 3 and informative 1, permissions be granted. We have a green donut again, so that permission is granted. That's unanimous. Don't think there's anything under exempt tonight, so thank you all for your time. And we've finished before 9 o'clock. That's good going. Thank you. Good night.